There's a number almost nobody calculates because the honest answer is genuinely frightening. It's the number of years a middle class income now needs to buy the exact same life your parents built in their 30s. In many major cities, that number has quietly grown larger than a single working lifetime. The middle class didn't collapse because people got lazy or stopped trying. It collapsed because the math underneath it broke, silently, while everyone kept playing by the old rules. My name is Marcos, and I've spent years obsessed with one uncomfortable question. Why do so many people who do everything right still feel like they're slowly falling behind? Most finance channels will tell you to budget harder, skip the coffee, and hustle on the weekends. But they're quietly avoiding the real story because the real story has nothing to do with your discipline. It's about a mathematical shift that turned the middle class from a destination into a treadmill that never stops. By the end, you'll understand why the rules changed and what to do about it. If you want to understand the machine instead of blaming yourself, watch this video until the end, because this will change how you see every paycheck you ever earn. For most of the 20th century, the middle class deal was simple, and it genuinely worked. You traded your time for wages, and those wages bought a house, a car, an education, and a quiet retirement. One income could comfortably carry an entire family. A house cost somewhere around 2 to 3 years of that single income. College was a summer job and a small manageable loan. The deal was almost a promise: work hard, stay loyal, and the system rewards you on the other side. But somewhere around the early 1980s, the inputs and the outputs of that deal quietly stopped matching. Wages began climbing slowly, almost in a flat, straight line. The price of everything that actually makes you middle class began climbing on a steep curve instead. Housing, healthcare, education, and childcare all started accelerating away from ordinary income. And here's the part most people completely miss: a straight line can never catch a curve. Once those two lines separated, the middle class stopped being a stable place to stand on. It slowly turned into a slope you have to keep sprinting up just to remain in the exact same spot. You feel it every month, even when your salary technically goes up. The raise arrives, and somehow the breathing room never does. That feeling isn't your imagination, and it isn't your fault. Picture your grandparents buying their first home on a factory wage with money left over. That wasn't luck or a booming stock market. It was simply how the math worked. Now picture yourself with two incomes, a college degree, and a better job, and still renting. Nothing about you got worse. The equation underneath your life got quietly rewritten. You're playing the same game your parents won, except the board itself has been flipped. It's the first symptom of a system whose math no longer adds up. So let me give you a number that reframes this entire conversation. In 1985, the median home in America cost roughly 3 times the median household income. Today, in many major cities, that same ratio sits at 8, 10, sometimes 12 times income. That is not ordinary inflation, and the difference matters enormously. Real inflation would lift wages and prices together, more or less in step. This is something else entirely. The assets pulled violently away from the labor. Think about what that actually means for a real human being trying to live a normal life. If a house costs 3 years of income, you can save a down payment in a few years and own it outright within 15. If that same house costs 10 years of income, the down payment alone can swallow an entire decade. And while you slowly save toward it, the target keeps drifting further away from you. You aren't standing still. You are falling behind in slow, almost invisible motion. Now take that single dynamic and multiply it across your whole life. A degree that cost $4,000 in 1980 can cost $40,000 or far more today. Healthcare that was once a minor line item became one of the leading reasons people go bankrupt. Wages, meanwhile, grew by only a small fraction of all of that. So the modern middle-class household does the only thing it possibly can: it borrows the difference. The lifestyle that used to be purchased with income is now rented with debt. And debt, unlike a house, is a curve that compounds against you instead of for you. Every credit card balance, every car loan, every line of financing quietly tilts the math further out of your favor. You're not just struggling to get ahead, you're paying interest for the privilege of falling behind. Let me put that gap in human terms because the percentages hide the real pain. In 1985, a worker earned, then bought a home, then built equity, then retired with options. Today, that same worker earns, then rents, then borrows, then hopes nothing ever goes wrong. One medical bill or a single layoff can erase a decade of careful saving overnight. This is why people who feel responsible still feel permanently one emergency away from disaster. The safety net the middle class promised was quietly replaced with a tightrope over debt. That is the first deep crack in the foundation, and it only gets more serious from here. Here's where the story gets genuinely strange. If the math broke this badly, why doesn't every single person feel it all at once? The answer is one of the most powerful forces in all of human behavior: the comparison trap. Your brain does not measure wealth in absolute numbers. It measures your wealth relative to the people standing right around you. So if your neighbor drives the same car, owns a similar house, and posts the same vacation photos, your brain quietly whispers that you must be fine. But here's the part almost nobody tells you out loud. Your neighbor is very likely running on the exact same invisible debt that you are. You're comparing yourself to people who are also slowly drowning and calling it staying afloat. Psychologists call this the reference group problem, and it quietly runs your entire financial life. You inherited your definition of normal from a generation whose underlying math actually worked. Your parents owned a home on a single income, so owning a home now feels like the bare baseline of a normal life. But the baseline moved decades ago, and your brain never received the memo. So you keep chasing the old definition of middle class using new, fundamentally broken math. You buy the house, you finance the car, and you fund the lifestyle that signals you've made it. And every single month, you feel a low, quiet anxiety you can't quite explain. You start asking yourself why it feels this hard when you're doing everything you were told to do. That anxiety is not a personal failure or a character flaw. It is the precise gap between the life you were promised and the math that actually exists today. Here's something that might genuinely blow your mind about how this trap operates. The harder you work to look successful, the deeper into the broken math you fall. Every upgrade to keep up with your reference group quietly moves your finish line further away. You start asking yourself a quiet question late at night when the house is finally silent. If I'm doing better than my parents on paper, why do I feel so much less secure? The answer is that paper success and real ownership stopped being the same thing decades ago. And once you truly see that gap, you can never fully unsee it again. So here's the truth that most finance channels will never say out loud. The middle class was never actually the goal. It was a transit station that an entire generation mistook for a final destination. And to understand why, you have to understand the single most important divide in any economy on Earth. There are really only two fundamentally different ways to make money in this world. You can sell your time, or you can own assets that quietly grow on their own. The middle class is built almost entirely on the first one, selling your time. You work, you get paid, you stop working, and the money immediately stops with you. But the wealthy are built on the second one, ownership. They own the houses you rent, the companies you buy from, and the index funds compounding silently while they sleep. Now here's the genuinely brutal part of this divide. When asset prices explode upward, the person selling time gets crushed, and the person owning assets gets richer. It is the exact same event producing two completely opposite results. A rising home price is a slow disaster for the renter and an effortless windfall for the owner. So the middle class isn't simply falling behind by some unlucky accident. It's falling behind because it is standing on the wrong side of the most important divide there is. It is trying to win a game of ownership while only ever selling its time, and no amount of skipping lattes or clipping coupons will ever move you across that line. Let me give you a number that puts this entire divide into brutal perspective. Over the last 40 years, wages roughly tripled, while major assets grew 10 times or more. If your wealth was tied to your wages, you crawled forward at a painful pace. If your wealth was tied to assets, you were quietly carried upward the entire time. The owner didn't work harder than the owner simply stood in a different current. This is the part nobody in finance wants to say plainly because it sounds almost unfair. The only thing that genuinely moves you is becoming an owner yourself. That single shift is the entire escape hatch hiding in plain sight. Now let me show you the exact math that proves this escape is completely real. Imagine two people who earn the identical salary for 30 straight years. The first one, call him David, spends everything he makes to maintain a polished middle-class image. A nicer car, a new phone every year, the lifestyle that simply looks successful from the outside. The second one, call her Sophia, lives just slightly below that image and buys ownership with the difference. She invests around $500 a month into a simple, boring, broad index fund. Nothing exotic, nothing risky, just quiet, relentless ownership. At a long-term historical average return of roughly 10%, here is what actually happens. After 30 years, Sophia hasn't just saved a comfortable little cushion. She has quietly built well over $1 million. David, earning the exact same salary the entire time, retires with almost nothing but memories of looking wealthy. Same income, same starting line, and two completely opposite endings. The difference wasn't luck, and it absolutely wasn't a bigger paycheck. The difference was which side of the divide each of them chose to stand on. And here's the number that should genuinely change how you see this week. Because of compounding, most of Sophia's fortune actually arrives in the final third of those years. The early decades feel painfully slow, almost pointless, like nothing is happening at all. Then the very same curve that always crushed the middle class finally begins working for her instead. And here's where it gets interesting because this isn't a story about being a genius. Sophia never picked a single winning stock or timed a single market crash correctly. She simply owned a small slice of the entire economy and refused to interrupt the process. Now imagine she had started 10 years earlier with the same boring $500. Her final number wouldn't grow a little, it would roughly double just from extra time. Time, not talent, is the most powerful and most ignored ingredient in this entire equation. That is the entire secret hiding quietly inside the broken math. The same curves that destroy the earner are the curves that reward the owner. But the truth is, this was never really about money at all. It's about who you decide to become the moment you finally understand the game. Because the instant you start owning instead of only earning, something genuinely shifts inside your head. You stop seeing your paycheck as the finish line and start seeing it as raw material. Every dollar quietly becomes a choice: rent the lifestyle or buy a small piece of the machine. You stop measuring yourself against your drowning neighbors and start measuring yourself against your own future. And slowly, the low anxiety that used to live in your chest begins to fade away. Not because you suddenly have far more money, but because you finally understand the math controlling it. You become the kind of person who reads the curve instead of being silently crushed by it. The kind of person who, 10 years from now, looks back on this exact moment as the real turning point. Your confidence at work changes when you no longer depend on every paycheck to survive. Your relationships change when money stops being a silent source of fear at dinner. Even your sleep changes because the cortisol of constant financial pressure slowly drains away. This is the part the spreadsheets never capture, and it's the part that matters most. You're not just building a portfolio, you're building a calmer, steadier version of yourself. The era of the middle class as a safe, automatic destination genuinely is mathematically over. But the era of the owner is wide open, and it was never reserved only for the already rich. It's reserved for whoever understands the divide first and actually acts on it. So go back to that frightening number from the very beginning of this video, the years it now takes to buy your parents' life on an ordinary middle-class income. For the person who only ever sells their time, that number keeps growing year after year forever. But for the person who owns, that very same number starts shrinking the moment they begin. The middle class quietly promised that hard work alone would carry you safely to the other side. Then the math broke that promise without ever telling you it had. Ownership makes a very different promise, and this is the one the math actually keeps. You don't need to be born wealthy, and you don't need some perfect oversized salary. You just need to stop standing on the wrong side of the divide and take one real step today. Because the people who understand this early don't just barely survive the end of the middle class, they quietly become the owners waiting on the other side of it. The end of the middle class isn't the end of opportunity, it's the end of one specific illusion. The illusion was that selling your time would ever be enough on its own. Ownership has never been more accessible to ordinary people than it is right now. So if this rewired the way you see your own money, go and see this video. In it, I'll show you what happened in the stock market crash of 1929.